Sometimes the most profound moments in our lives happen in complete silence. When words become too heavy to carry and emotions too deep to express, we find ourselves standing at the crossroads of love and loss, holding on to memories that feel both eternal and fleeting. This is the story of Kate and William, two souls whose love was tested by circumstances beyond their control, leading to a goodbye that would echo through their hearts forever. In a world where we often take tomorrow for granted, their story reminds us that some farewells come without warning, and the most powerful conversations are the ones we never get to have. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window of the small cottage, casting golden rays across the wooden table where Kate sat with her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. She watched the steam rise and disappear, much like the dreams she and William had built together over the past 3 years. The silence in the house felt different today, heavier somehow, as if the walls themselves knew what was coming. William stood at the counter, his back to her, methodically buttering toast that he probably wouldn't eat. His shoulders were tense, and Kate could see the slight tremor in his hands that he was trying so hard to hide. They had been dancing around this moment for weeks, both knowing it was inevitable, yet neither brave enough to say the words that would make it real. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday. Kate remembered the exact moment because she had been laughing at something William had said about their neighbor's overly enthusiastic morning jogging routine. The postman's knock had interrupted her laughter, and somehow, even before William opened the official-looking envelope, she knew their world was about to change forever. William's deployment orders were clear and non-negotiable. 6 months in Afghanistan, leaving in 2 weeks. The military didn't care about cottage breakfasts or morning laughter or the way Kate's eyes lit up when she saw him coming home from work. The military only cared about duty, honor, and the mission that awaited him thousands of miles away. They had spent the following days in a strange kind of limbo, going through the motions of their daily routine, while an invisible countdown clock ticked away the hours they had left together. Kate threw herself into her work at the local library, staying late to reorganize sections that didn't need reorganizing. Anything to avoid coming home to the half-packed duffel bag that sat like a silent accusation in their bedroom. William, for his part, had become obsessively practical. He fixed the leaky faucet in the bathroom that had been dripping for months, changed the oil in Kate's car, and wrote detailed instructions for everything from the quirky way the washing machine had to be loaded to the specific type of fertilizer the garden needed in spring. He was trying to leave pieces of himself behind, breadcrumbs of care that Kate could follow during the long months ahead. But neither of them could bring themselves to talk about what this separation really meant. They couldn't discuss the statistics they both knew by heart, the probability of soldiers coming home changed or not coming home at all. They couldn't voice the fear that gnawed at them both in the quiet moments, the terror that this goodbye might be their last. Their friends meant well with their attempts at comfort. Sarah from the library kept insisting that 6 months would fly by, that Kate would be so busy she wouldn't have time to worry. Mark, William's best friend from basic training, regaled them with stories of his own deployment, emphasizing how much stronger it had made his relationship with his wife. But Kate and William both knew that these well-meaning words missed the point entirely. It wasn't just about the time apart. It was about the fundamental uncertainty that now shadowed every moment they shared. The cottage they had rented together had become their sanctuary over the years. It was small and imperfect, with creaky floors and windows that didn't quite close properly, but it was theirs. Kate had painted the kitchen walls a warm yellow that reminded her of sunflowers, and William had built shelves in the living room for Kate's ever-growing collection of books. They had planned to buy it someday, to make it their forever home, to raise children within its weathered walls. Now those dreams felt suspended in time, waiting for a future that might never come. Kate found herself memorizing everything about these last days together. The way William hummed tunelessly while he shaved in the morning. The sound of his key in the lock when he came home from his final training sessions. The weight of his arm around her shoulders when they watched television in the evening. Both of them pretending to pay attention to shows they normally would have enjoyed. She was creating a mental archive, storing away moments like treasures against the poverty of the months ahead. William was doing the same, though he tried to hide it. Kate caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she wasn't looking, his eyes tracing her face with an intensity that made her heart ache. She saw him pick up and examine ordinary objects, her coffee mug, the book she was reading, the small ceramic bird they had bought together at a craft fair last summer, as if he was trying to imprint their details into his memory. The physical preparations for his departure were almost easier than the emotional ones. His uniforms were cleaned and packed, his affairs were in order, his will was updated. The army had given them a checklist, and they followed it methodically, grateful for tasks that didn't require them to navigate the minefield of their feelings. But as the pile of necessities grew smaller and the duffel bag grew fuller, the reality of his leaving became impossible to ignore. Their last weekend together was torture disguised as normalcy. They went to their favorite restaurant, where they had celebrated their first anniversary, and where William had nervously asked Kate to move in with him. They walked through the park where they had spent countless Sunday afternoons, feeding ducks and sharing ice cream, and making plans for their future. They visited Kate's parents, who tried valiantly to keep the conversation light, while her mother's eyes filled with unshed tears every time she looked at William. On Sunday evening, they sat in their tiny garden behind the cottage, watching the sun set behind the apple tree that had been bare when they first moved in and was now heavy with fruit they would never harvest together. William reached for Kate's hand, and she let him take it, both of them knowing that these casual touches would soon become precious memories. "I want to talk about it," Kate said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to say all the things we're both thinking, but I'm afraid that if I start, I won't be able to stop crying, and then tomorrow will be even harder than it already is." William squeezed her hand gently. "I know," he said. "I feel the same way. It's like if we don't say it out loud, maybe it won't be real. Maybe I won't actually have to leave." But they both knew he did have to leave. Duty called, and William was the kind of man who answered that call, even when it meant leaving behind everything he loved most in the world. It was one of the things Kate admired most about him, his sense of honor and commitment, and also one of the things that was breaking her heart. As darkness fell around them, they finally went inside, holding hands like teenagers, desperate to maintain physical contact for as long as possible. They made love that night with a tenderness that spoke all the words they couldn't say aloud, their bodies having the conversation their voices couldn't manage. Afterward, they lay awake in the darkness, memorizing the sound of each other's breathing, the warmth of shared space, the simple miracle of being together. Morning came anyway, as mornings always do, indifferent to human sorrow. Kate woke first and lay very still, listening to William sleep, trying to capture this last moment of peace before the day began in earnest. When he finally stirred, she felt her heart begin its final countdown, each heartbeat bringing them closer to the moment when she would watch him walk away. The knock on the door came at exactly 8:30. Mark had volunteered to drive William to the base, understanding without being told that Kate couldn't bear to make that journey herself, couldn't bear to be the one to drive him away from her. Through the window, she could see Mark waiting in his truck, diplomatically looking away from the cottage, giving them these last private moments. William picked up his duffel bag and turned to face Kate. They stood in their small hallway, surrounded by the ordinary objects of their shared life. Her coat hanging on its hook, his shoes by the door, the small mirror where they had smiled at their reflection countless mornings. Now everything felt charged with significance, transformed by the weight of goodbye. This was the moment they had been dreading and avoiding, the moment when one of them would have to find words adequate to express 3 years of love, months of fear, and a future full of uncertainty. Kate opened her mouth to speak, but found that all the speeches she had practiced in her head had deserted her. William looked at her with eyes that held all the love and sorrow and desperate hope that she felt in her own heart. And in that moment, they both understood that there were no words that could contain what they felt for each other. No combination of syllables that could adequately express the magnitude of their love or the depth of their fear. Instead, William reached out and touched Kate's face with infinite gentleness, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheek as if he was painting her portrait in his mind. Kate leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, and they stood there in their hallway, saying goodbye in the only language that mattered, the language of touch, of presence, of love that exists beyond the poverty of words. The knock came again, more insistent this time, and they both knew that time had run out. William picked up his bag and walked to the door, Kate following behind him like a shadow. He paused with his hand on the doorknob and looked back at her one more time, and in that look was everything they had never said and everything they didn't need to say. Kate memorized his face in that moment, storing away every detail against the long months ahead. Then he opened the door and walked out into the morning sunlight. Kate watched from the doorway as he threw his bag into Mark's truck and climbed into the passenger seat. The truck started with a rumble that seemed too loud in the quiet morning air, and Kate raised her hand in a small wave as they drove away, her heart breaking and soaring simultaneously with the knowledge that sometimes the most profound love is expressed not in grand gestures or eloquent speeches, but in a moment of perfect silence that says everything. Kate stood in the doorway long after the sound of Mark's truck had faded into the distance, her raised hand slowly falling to her side like a flag of surrender. The morning air was crisp against her skin, carrying the scent of autumn leaves and the promise of winter, but she felt nothing except the profound emptiness that had opened up inside her chest the moment William disappeared from view. The cottage behind her felt different now, transformed from a home into a museum of memories. Every object, every corner, every shadow held the echo of his presence. She finally forced herself to close the door and turn back into the house, but her feet felt like lead as she walked through rooms that suddenly seemed too large and too quiet. The coffee cups from their last breakfast together still sat on the kitchen table, his only half empty, as if he might return at any moment to finish it. Kate found herself unable to clear them away, these ordinary objects that had become sacred simply by being the last things they had shared together. Instead, she sat down in her chair and stared at his empty place, trying to process the reality that he was gone. The first day was the hardest. Kate called in sick to work, unable to imagine facing the concerned looks of her colleagues or the well-meaning questions about how she was holding up. Instead, she wandered through the cottage like a ghost, picking up items that belonged to William and setting them down again, unsure whether to pack them away or leave them exactly as they were. His side of the closet looked naked without his uniforms, just a few casual shirts, and his favorite sweater hanging there like abandoned dreams. Kate buried her face in the sweater, breathing in his scent, trying to convince herself that this separation was temporary, that he would come home and fill these empty spaces with his laughter and his terrible jokes and his habit of leaving his socks on the bedroom floor. The phone rang 3 times that first day. Twice it was well-meaning friends asking how she was doing, and once it was her mother, who seemed to understand without being told that Kate wasn't ready to talk about it yet. Kate let the machine pick up all 3 calls, her mother's gentle voice leaving a message that she was there whenever Kate needed her. No pressure, no timeline. By evening, the silence in the cottage had become oppressive. Kate had grown accustomed to the sound of William moving through their space, the comfortable domestic symphony of 2 people sharing a life. The way he cleared his throat when he was thinking, the sound of his feet on the stairs, the rustle of newspaper pages turning. All of it was gone, replaced by a quiet so complete it felt alive. She tried to watch television, but the laugh track of sitcoms felt insulting in the face of her sadness, and the romantic comedies that she and William had enjoyed together now seemed like cruel jokes. She tried to read, but the words swam before her eyes, meaningless marks on paper that couldn't compete with the story playing out in her own heart. That night, Kate lay in their bed, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds that had always been there but that she had never noticed when William was beside her. The house settled with tiny creaks and sighs. The refrigerator hummed in the kitchen, and somewhere in the walls, a pipe made a soft ticking sound that reminded her uncomfortably of a clock counting down the minutes until she would see him again. She had expected to cry, had prepared herself for tears, but they didn't come. Instead, she felt hollow, as if all the emotion had been drained out of her, leaving behind only an ache that was too deep for tears. She reached across the bed and touched his pillow, cold and smooth without the warmth of his head, and felt the first crack in the dam of her composure. The second day was marginally better, if only because it was different. Kate forced herself to get up, shower, and go to work, grateful for the routine that required her to function like a normal human being. Her colleagues were kind but tactful, asking only gentle questions and giving her space to find her footing in this new reality. Mrs. Henderson, the head librarian, found Kate organizing returns with mechanical precision, her movements efficient but distant. "My dear," she said gently, her voice carrying decades of wisdom and kindness, "you don't have to pretend with us. We all know what you're going through, and we want you to know that you're not alone." Kate looked up from the books she was shelving, meeting Mrs. Henderson's warm eyes, and felt some of the ice around her heart begin to thaw. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted quietly. "I don't know how to be me without him." Mrs. Henderson nodded understanding. You'll learn, she said simply. Not because you want to, but because you have to. And, in the learning, you'll discover strengths you didn't know you had. It's not the path you would have chosen, but it's the path you're on, and you'll walk it one step at a time. Those words became Kate's mantra in the days that followed. One step at a time, 1 hour at a time, one breath at a time. She established a routine that carried her through the daylight hours. Work, grocery shopping, small household tasks that kept her hands busy and her mind occupied. But the evenings remained difficult, stretching before her like a vast empty canvas that she didn't know how to fill. William had been gone for a week when the first letter arrived. Kate found it waiting for her when she came home from work, her name written in his familiar handwriting on an envelope that bore the official stamps and markings of military mail. She held it for a long time before opening it, treasuring the knowledge that his hands had touched this paper, that his thoughts had shaped these words across the thousands of miles that separated them. The letter was careful and cheerful, full of descriptions of his journey to the base and his first impressions of his new temporary home. He wrote about the other soldiers, the surprisingly good food, and the spectacular sunsets that painted the desert sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of the kitchen walls she had painted in their cottage. He asked about her work, about her parents, about the neighbors, and their overly enthusiastic jogging routine. What he didn't write about was how much he missed her, or how difficult the adjustment was, or whether he was scared. Between the lines of his optimistic prose, Kate could read the loneliness and uncertainty that he was trying so hard to hide. She could picture him at a table in some impersonal barracks, carefully crafting words that would reassure her while his own heart was breaking with the distance between them. Kate wrote back immediately, filling pages with news of home, updates on mutual friends, and descriptions of the small changes in their familiar world. She wrote about how the apple tree in their garden was dropping fruit that she couldn't bear to pick alone, how the leaves were changing color in the park where they used to walk, how their neighbor had finally bought proper running shoes and now jogged with slightly less enthusiasm, but considerably more comfort. What she didn't write about was the way his absence filled every corner of their cottage like a presence of its own, or how she had started sleeping with his pillow clutched against her chest, or how she sometimes caught herself setting the table for two before remembering that she was dining alone. She crafted her own careful optimism, painting a picture of a woman coping well with a temporary separation, when the truth was that she felt like she was learning to breathe underwater. The letters became a lifeline for both of them, a bridge across the impossible distance that kept them connected even when everything else felt uncertain. They arrived irregularly, sometimes 2 in 1 week, sometimes none for 10 days, depending on the vagaries of military mail and operational security. Kate learned to treasure each envelope, to read each letter multiple times, and to write her responses with the same care that William put into his correspondence. As autumn deepened into winter, Kate discovered reserves of strength she hadn't known she possessed. She learned to change the oil in her car, following the detailed instructions William had left behind. She figured out how to operate the temperamental washing machine and how to keep the garden neat even as it prepared for its winter sleep. Each small victory felt like a tribute to their love, proof that the care he had poured into their shared life could sustain her even in his absence. The library became her refuge, the one place where she could lose herself completely in other people's stories and forget, for a few hours at a time, about the story she was living. She threw herself into her work with new energy, organizing reading programs for children, helping elderly patrons navigate the mysteries of the computer system, and creating displays that celebrated books about courage, adventure, and the triumph of love over distance. Mrs. Henderson watched this transformation with the knowing eyes of someone who had seen many young women navigate the treacherous waters of military love. She assigned Kate to special projects that would stretch her capabilities and keep her mind engaged, understanding instinctively that purposeful work was one of the best medicines for a lonely heart. 3 months into William's deployment, Kate received a letter that was different from the others. The handwriting was the same, but the tone was more subdued, the carefully constructed optimism more fragile. William wrote about a difficult mission, about losing a friend to an improvised explosive device, about the way death could come suddenly, in a place where peace was always temporary. For the first time, his letters revealed the cracks in his own emotional armor. He wrote about nightmares that woke him in the small hours of the morning, about the weight of responsibility he felt for the younger soldiers under his command, about the way fear could creep into even the most routine activities. He was still protecting her, still trying to shield her from the worst of his reality. But his need for connection had finally overcome his desire to spare her worry. Kate read this letter with tears streaming down her face, finally allowing herself to cry for both of them. She cried for the innocence they had lost, for the simple faith they had once had in their ability to control their own destiny, for the man she loved who was being forced to confront mortality in a way that would change him forever. She cried for herself too, for the fear that kept her awake at night, for the uncertainty that colored every day, for the woman she was becoming in his absence. Her response to that letter was different too, more honest, more vulnerable. She wrote about her own fears, about the way she sometimes woke up reaching for him in the darkness, about the dreams where he came home, changed beyond recognition. She wrote about how proud she was of his courage, how much she admired his dedication to his fellow soldiers, how desperately she missed not just his presence, but his partnership in making sense of a world that sometimes seemed too complicated to navigate alone. The exchange of these more honest letters marked a turning point in their separation. They stopped trying to protect each other from the truth of their experience and began sharing the real weight of what they were both carrying. Kate wrote about the challenges of maintaining their cottage alone, about learning to fix things that had always been his domain, about the way independence felt like both a victory and a loss. William wrote back with detailed explanations of repair techniques and encouragement for her growing competence, but also with admissions of his own struggles. He told her about the dreams where he walked through their cottage touching familiar objects, about the way he carried her photograph everywhere and sometimes talked to it when the loneliness became too much to bear, about the countdown calendar he kept hidden in his footlocker, marking off each day that brought him closer to home. Winter settled over the cottage and the base where William was stationed, creating a strange symmetry in their separation. Kate learned to appreciate the quiet beauty of snow covering their garden, transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. She sent William photographs of their cottage dressed in winter white, and he sent back pictures of the stark beauty of the desert under rare rainfall, both of them sharing the seasons they were experiencing apart. The halfway point of his deployment came and went, marked by a celebration that felt more like mourning. 3 months down, 3 months to go, but Kate had learned that time moved differently when you were waiting for someone. Days could drag like weeks, while weeks could disappear without her noticing, swallowed up by the routine of survival and the small rituals that kept her connected to the man she loved. Friends and family continued to offer support, but Kate found that she had developed a new appreciation for solitude. She discovered that she enjoyed her own company in ways she had never explored when William was there to fill the quiet moments. She read books she might never have chosen when they could discuss options together. She tried new recipes that reflected only her own taste. She learned to make decisions without consultation, to trust her own judgment, to be complete on her own. This growth felt like both a betrayal and a gift. She was becoming more herself, but she was also becoming someone William had never met, someone who existed independently of their relationship. She wondered if he was changing too, if the man who came home would be different from the one who had left, if they would have to learn to love each other all over again. As winter began its slow retreat into spring, Kate received news that William's deployment might be extended. Nothing was certain, the letter explained, but there was a possibility that his tour could be lengthened by several months. The blow was devastating, coming just as she had begun to count down the final weeks until his return. That night, Kate sat in their garden under a sky full of stars, holding his letter and trying to find the strength to face the possibility of more months alone. The apple tree that had been bare when he left was showing the first signs of spring buds, a promise of fruit they still might not harvest together. She thought about the woman she had been when he left, and the woman she was becoming in his absence, and she realized that love sometimes required you to grow in directions you never expected, to find strength you never knew you needed, to hold on when everything in you wanted to let go. The news of the possible extension hit Kate like a physical blow, leaving her gasping for breath in the quiet kitchen where she had read William's carefully worded letter. She set the pages down on the table with trembling hands, staring at the words that had just rewritten her entire timeline. 3 more months, maybe 4. The exact length would depend on operational needs and the situation on the ground, factors completely beyond their control. For the first time since William had left, Kate felt truly angry. Not at him, never at him, but at the circumstances that seemed determined to keep them apart, at the military machine that treated human hearts like expendable resources, at the unfairness of a world where duty and love were so often in opposition. She paced through their cottage like a caged animal, her carefully constructed acceptance crumbling under the weight of this new uncertainty. The anger was cleansing in a way that surprised her. For months, she had been patient and understanding, the perfect military partner, accepting their separation with grace and dignity. But this extension felt like a betrayal of the contract she had made with herself, the promise that she could endure anything for a predetermined length of time. Now that timeline had been shattered, and, with it, some of her carefully maintained composure. Kate called in sick to work the next day, needing time to process this new reality without the distraction of other people's needs and expectations. She spent the morning walking through the park where she and William had shared so many happy afternoons, trying to find peace in the familiar paths and the emerging signs of spring. Daffodils were pushing through the soil where snow had melted, and the bare branches of trees were showing the faint green haze of new growth. The persistence of life, its determination to continue despite setbacks and obstacles, began to work its quiet magic on Kate's troubled spirit. These flowers didn't know whether winter might return unexpectedly, whether a late frost might kill their tender shoots, but they bloomed anyway, trusting in the promise of spring even without guarantees. There was a lesson in their courage that Kate took to heart. By the time she returned to the cottage, Kate had made a decision. She would not let this extension defeat her. She would not waste the extra months they were being forced apart dwelling on what was being taken from them. Instead, she would use this time to become even stronger, even more independent, even more worthy of the love they shared. If the military wanted to test their relationship, she would show them exactly what they were dealing with. Kate threw herself into projects with renewed energy. She decided to renovate the cottage's small bathroom, a job that William had been planning to tackle when he returned. Armed with library books on home improvement and a determination that surprised even her, she began learning about plumbing and tile work and the satisfying challenge of creating something beautiful with her own hands. The project was harder than she had anticipated. The old pipes fought her every step of the way. The measurements never seemed to come out exactly right, and there were moments when she sat on the bathroom floor surrounded by tools and half-completed work, wondering what she had gotten herself into. But each small victory felt like a triumph. Each problem she solved without help was proof of her growing competence. Mrs. Henderson watched Kate's transformation with admiration and concern. The young woman who had once seemed so fragile in the face of separation was becoming someone formidable, someone who attacked challenges with fierce determination. But there was something almost manic about Kate's energy now, a quality that suggested she was running from her feelings rather than processing them. "You know," Mrs. Henderson said gently one afternoon as Kate organized the fiction section with military precision, "it's okay to be sad about the extension. It's okay to be angry. You don't have to be superhuman just because you're in love with someone who's far away." Kate paused in her work, her hands still on the book she was shelving. "If I let myself feel how angry I am," she said quietly, "I'm afraid I might not be able to stop. And if I can't stop being angry, how can I keep loving him? How can I keep believing that this is worth it?" It was the most honest thing Kate had said about her situation in months, and Mrs. Henderson recognized the significance of the admission. "Love isn't about never feeling angry," she said gently. "It's about feeling angry and choosing love anyway. It's about walking through all the difficult emotions and coming out the other side still holding hands." That evening, Kate sat down to write William a different kind of letter. Instead of her usual carefully cheerful update on life at home, she poured her heart onto paper, telling him about her rage at the extension, her fear that she was becoming someone he wouldn't recognize, her exhaustion at being strong all the time. She wrote about the bathroom renovation and her pride in learning new skills, but also about the moments when she felt overwhelmed by the sheer scope of what she was trying to accomplish alone. She wrote about missing him with an intensity that sometimes took her breath away, about dreaming of conversations they had never had, and planning reunions that might now be months further away than she had hoped. She admitted to talking to his photograph when the cottage felt too quiet, and to wearing his sweater to bed when the nights felt too long. When she finished writing, Kate stared at the pages for a long time, wondering if she should send such an honest account of her struggle. All of their correspondence had been about protecting each other, about presenting the best possible version of their separation. But Sitting in their kitchen with the evidence of her vulnerability spread across the table, Kate realized that protection was another kind of distance, another way of being apart. She sealed the letter and mailed it the next morning, then spent the following weeks wondering how William would respond to this glimpse behind the curtain of her composure. His reply, when it came, was equally honest. He wrote about his own anger at the extension, about the way hope had become a luxury he couldn't afford in a place where every plan was subject to change without notice. William described his own struggles with the person he was becoming in the desert. The young man who had left their cottage had been optimistic and trusting, believing that good intentions and hard work could solve most problems. The soldier who was writing to her had seen too much death and destruction to maintain that simple faith. He worried that she wouldn't recognize the man who eventually came home, that the changes in him might be too profound for their love to bridge. He wrote about nightmares that featured their cottage, dreams where he came home to find her gone, the rooms empty and cold, all evidence of their life together erased. He described the way fear could twist love into something desperate and clinging, how the possibility of loss could make even happy memories feel dangerous. This exchange of vulnerable truths marked another evolution in their relationship. They began writing to each other with a rawness that was both frightening and liberating, sharing not just the surface events of their days, but the deeper currents of emotion that ran beneath their carefully maintained routines. Kate wrote about crying in the grocery store when she saw a couple shopping together. William wrote about the way her letters were sometimes the only thing that made him feel human at the end of a brutal day. As spring turned into summer, Kate's renovation projects expanded beyond the bathroom. She painted the bedroom a soft blue that reminded her of William's eyes. She planted a vegetable garden in the backyard. And she built a bookshelf for the living room using skills she had learned from online tutorials and a healthy dose of trial and error. Each project was both a way to pass the time and a gift for the future they were still building together. The cottage was changing, becoming something that reflected both of their influences, but also Kate's growing sense of her own capabilities. William's practical improvements from before his deployment were now complemented by Kate's more aesthetic touches. The house was becoming a physical record of their love story, layers of care and attention accumulating over time and distance. Summer brought news that was both good and bad. William's unit had been successful in their mission, helping to stabilize a region that had been plagued by violence for months. The work they were doing was important and effective, which made the extension of their deployment both understandable and bearable. But the success also meant that they were likely to be asked to stay even longer to see their mission through to its conclusion. Kate received this news with a calmness that surprised her. The woman who had been devastated by the first extension now met the possibility of a second with equanimity. She had learned to live with uncertainty, to find joy and purpose even when her future felt completely out of her control. The cottage was becoming beautiful under her care. Her work at the library was more fulfilling than ever, and she had discovered friendships and interests that existed independently of her relationship with William. This growth felt like both a victory and a small betrayal. She was becoming complete on her own, learning to be happy without him, and part of her worried that this independence might change the fundamental dynamic of their love. Would they still need each other in the same way when they were both capable of thriving alone? Would their reunion require them to give up the selves they had discovered in separation? William's letters suggested that he was grappling with similar questions. He wrote about the leader he had become, the respect he had earned from younger soldiers, the confidence he had gained in making life and death decisions. He was discovering capabilities and strengths that had been dormant during their peaceful life together, and he worried that the intensity of his military experience might make civilian life feel tame and meaningless. But beneath these concerns about change and growth ran a deeper constant, an unwavering love that distance and time only seemed to strengthen. Their letters became love poems written in prose, declarations of devotion that were all the more powerful for being grounded in the reality of their shared struggle. They were learning to love not just who they had been together, but who they were becoming apart. Kate's birthday came and went with a quiet celebration at the library, her colleagues presenting her with a cake and the gift of a beautiful journal for writing. She spent the evening alone in the cottage, reading birthday letters from family and friends, including a package from William that had been carefully timed to arrive on the exact day. Inside were a necklace he had bought from a local craftsman and a letter that brought tears to her eyes with its expression of love and admiration for the woman she was becoming. The summer heat was oppressive, but Kate found ways to stay cool and comfortable in the cottage that had no air conditioning. She created cross breezes with strategically placed fans, spent afternoons reading in the shade of the apple tree that was now heavy with fruit, and discovered the simple pleasure of ice cream eaten directly from the container while watching old movies on late-night television. These small pleasures accumulated into a life that was different from what she had planned, but satisfying in its own way. Kate was learning that happiness didn't require the presence of the person you loved most, though their absence created a constant ache that never entirely went away. She could be content without William while still missing him desperately, could build a meaningful life alone while still dreaming of the day when they would be together again. As autumn approached, marking a full year since William's deployment had begun, Kate received news that the end was finally in sight. Not next month, not even by Christmas, but by the following spring, his tour would definitely be over. No more extensions, no more uncertainty. They had a date to circle on the calendar, a concrete goal to work toward. The relief was overwhelming, but it was tempered by a new kind of anxiety. After so many months of adaptation and growth and learning to live without each other, how would they navigate the challenge of coming back together? They had both changed in profound ways, become people they had never been when they were a couple. Would their love be strong enough to encompass these new versions of themselves? Would they be able to create a life together that honored both their shared past and their individual growth? Kate looked around the cottage that had been transformed by her hands and her vision, thought about the woman she had become through necessity and determination, and felt both pride and uncertainty about the future. She had learned to be complete on her own, but she had never stopped wanting to share that completeness with the man she loved. The question now was whether they would be able to create something new together, something that was richer and stronger for having survived the test of separation. Standing in their kitchen as autumn light streamed through windows she had cleaned and painted, Kate felt the weight of all the months behind them and all the months still ahead. She thought about the goodbye without words that had started this journey, and she wondered what their reunion would look like, what words they would find to bridge the distance they had traveled both apart and toward each other. The woman who said goodbye to William would not be the same woman who welcomed him home, and she was both scared and excited to discover what that would mean for the love that had sustained them through the longest year of their lives. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing the cottage in snow that transformed the familiar landscape into something magical and strange. Kate woke on a December morning to find their small world muffled in white. The garden where she had worked so hard buried under a pristine cover that made everything look new and full of possibility. She stood at the kitchen window with her coffee, watching the way the morning light caught the crystals on the apple tree's bare branches, and felt something shift inside her chest. The feeling took her by surprise. For more than a year, she had carried William's absence like a weight, a constant awareness of the space beside her that should have been filled. But, looking out at the snow-covered garden, Kate realized that somewhere along the way, that weight had transformed into something else. Not acceptance exactly, and certainly not contentment with his being away, but a kind of peace with her own ability to carry on, to find beauty and meaning even in the midst of longing. Her phone rang, interrupting her contemplation, and Kate's heart jumped as it always did when unexpected calls came at unusual hours. Military families learned to fear the telephone, to associate unexpected communication with terrible news. But the voice on the other end was William's, crackling with static, but unmistakably his, calling from a satellite phone during a brief break in operations. "I can see my breath," he said after the initial rush of hearing each other's voices, and Kate laughed, understanding immediately that he was trying to share the moment with her, to bridge the physical distance with small details. "It's actually cold here for once. I'm wearing that wool sweater you sent, and I keep thinking about you knitting it, imagining your hands making something that's keeping me warm." Kate closed her eyes, picturing him in the sweater she had worked on during the long evening hours, following a pattern her grandmother had taught her decades ago. She had poured months of love into those stitches, and knowing that her work was wrapped around him thousands of miles away felt like a small miracle of connection. They talked for 20 precious minutes, their conversation jumping from topic to topic with the desperate efficiency of people who knew their time was limited. William told her about the village children who had started waving when his patrol passed, about the progress they were making in rebuilding a school that had been damaged in fighting, about a letter he had received from his younger brother announcing an engagement. Kate shared news of the cottage, describing the bathroom renovation that had finally been completed to her satisfaction, the way the apple tree looked heavy with snow, and the Christmas decorations she had put up even though she would be celebrating alone. She told him about the promotion she had received at the library, about the literacy program she was now coordinating, about the way her life had expanded in directions she had never expected. "I'm proud of you," William said suddenly, his voice serious despite the static. "I know this hasn't been what either of us planned, but you've become someone amazing, Kate. Someone I can't wait to meet all over again." The words hit her with unexpected force, and Kate felt tears spring to her eyes. This was what she had needed to hear, confirmation that the growth and change she had experienced weren't moving her away from him, but toward a better version of the woman he had fallen in love with. They were both becoming new people, but they were doing it in service of the same love that had sustained them from the beginning. When the call ended, Kate sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, holding the phone and replaying every word of their conversation. The sound of his voice had awakened all the longing she had learned to manage, but it had also filled her with hope in a way that letters couldn't quite accomplish. They were going to make it through this separation. They were going to find each other again on the other side. Christmas came and went quietly. Kate spent the holiday with her parents, helping her mother cook the traditional feast and listening to her father's stories about his own military service decades earlier. Her family had learned to navigate conversations about William carefully, understanding that Kate's feelings about his absence were complicated and couldn't be easily addressed with simple reassurance or sympathy. On Christmas night, alone in the cottage that glittered with lights she had strung carefully around every window, Kate opened William's gift. Inside the carefully wrapped package was a carved wooden box, obviously made by hand, with her initials worked into the lid in an intricate pattern. Inside the box was a letter explaining that he had learned woodworking from an older soldier, spending his free time creating something that would be beautiful and useful and completely unique to them. Kate ran her fingers over the smooth wood, imagining William's hands shaping it, thinking of her while he worked. The box was meant to hold letters, he explained in his note, all the correspondence they had shared during his deployment. Someday, when they were old and their memories had grown dim, they could read these letters and remember what it felt like to love each other across impossible distances, to believe in a future they couldn't see. The idea of growing old with William, of having a shared history that included both this separation and whatever came after, filled Kate with a warmth that had nothing to do with the fireplace crackling across the room. She carefully placed all of his letters in the wooden box, arranging them chronologically, and set it on the mantelpiece where she could see it every day. Winter deepened, bringing storms that tested Kate's ability to maintain the cottage alone. She learned to shovel snow from the walkway, to keep the pipes from freezing, and to manage the temperamental heating system that had always been William's responsibility. Each challenge met and overcome added to her growing sense of competence, her confidence that she could handle whatever life presented to her. The library became even more of a refuge during the darkest months of winter. Kate threw herself into organizing reading programs, helping patrons navigate digital resources, and creating displays that celebrated books about resilience, adventure, and the power of human connection. Her work felt more meaningful now, informed by her own experience of finding strength in difficult circumstances. Mrs. Henderson, watching Kate's continued growth with the wisdom of someone who had seen many young women navigate the challenges of military love, began including her in higher-level projects and decision-making. Kate found herself coordinating with other libraries in the region, developing programs that would serve multiple communities, and representing her institution at professional conferences. "You've become someone I depend on," Mrs. Henderson said one snowy afternoon as they planned programming for the spring. "When William comes home, he's going to find himself with quite an accomplished partner." The comment made Kate pause. She had been so focused on enduring William's absence that she hadn't fully considered how her professional growth might affect their relationship. She was no longer the young woman who had primarily defined herself in relation to the man she loved. She had developed interests, skills, and professional relationships that existed independently of their romance. And she wondered how William would adapt to this more complex version of the woman he had left behind. February brought news that William's unit would begin their transition home in early spring, with most soldiers returning by the middle of May. The official notification arrived on a Tuesday, delivered by the same postal service that had brought so many letters over the past 18 months. But this envelope contained the promise of an ending rather than another installment in their ongoing separation. Kate read the letter 3 times before the reality sank in. May. He would be home in May, when the apple tree in their garden would be blooming with the promise of fruit they would finally harvest together. The countdown that had begun so painfully when he left would finally reach its conclusion, and they would have the chance to discover what they had become both apart and together. The relief was enormous, but it was accompanied by a kind of anxiety Kate hadn't anticipated. For 18 months, she had lived with the structure of separation, the certainty that William was away and that her job was to maintain their life until he returned. Now she faced the challenge of reunion, of integrating two people who had grown and changed in profound ways during their time apart. Kate began preparing for William's homecoming with the same methodical attention she had brought to managing his absence. She planned improvements to the cottage, considering how to incorporate his belongings back into spaces that she had reorganized according to her own needs and preferences. She thought about the rhythms of their daily life that would need to be renegotiated, the way two independent people would learn to be a couple again. March arrived with signs of spring that felt like promises. Daffodils pushed through the soil in the garden Kate had tended alone, and the bare branches of trees began to show the faint green haze of emerging leaves. The cottage itself seemed to be awakening from its winter sleep, and Kate felt her own energy responding to the lengthening days and warming temperatures. She received a letter from William that was different from all the others, written not from the base where he had been stationed, but from a transition facility where soldiers were being prepared for their return to civilian life. His handwriting looked different somehow, more confident maybe, or perhaps just shaped by experiences that had changed him in ways both subtle and profound. William wrote about the strange process of preparing to leave a place he had never wanted to be, but that had become familiar through sheer duration. He described the mixture of excitement and anxiety that all the returning soldiers seemed to feel, the way anticipation could be almost as overwhelming as the separation itself had been. He was eager to come home, but he was also nervous about whether home would feel the same to the man he had become. Kate understood his nervousness because she felt it too. They had maintained their connection through letters and occasional phone calls, but they had also spent 18 months becoming individuals in ways that might not be entirely compatible with being a couple. She had learned to make decisions without consultation, to find happiness without dependence on another person's presence, to define herself according to her own standards rather than in relation to someone else's needs. As April unfolded around her, Kate found herself torn between excitement and apprehension. She wanted William home more than she had ever wanted anything, but she also feared losing the independence and confidence she had worked so hard to develop. She worried that reunion might require her to diminish herself, to step back from the professional and personal growth that had sustained her through his absence. The apple tree in their garden bloomed magnificently that spring, covering itself in white and pink flowers that filled the air with sweetness and promise. Kate stood beneath its branches one warm afternoon, remembering the day William had left when the tree was bare and winter dormant. So much had changed since then, in the world and in herself, but the tree's annual cycle of dormancy and renewal felt like a metaphor for the faith that had carried her through the darkest months. William's final letter arrived on the first day of May, postmarked from the base where he was completing his out-processing, but written in his own hand with news that made Kate's heart race with excitement and terror in equal measure. His flight home had been confirmed. He would be arriving at the regional airport on Thursday, May 15th, at 2:30 in the afternoon. After 18 months, 4 days, and countless hours of separation, their reunion finally had a specific time and place. Kate read the letter over and over, memorizing not just the details, but the emotional undertone of William's words. He sounded excited but cautious, hopeful but realistic about the challenges they might face. He acknowledged that they had both changed, that the people who embraced in their hallway in 2 weeks might be different from the ones who had said goodbye without words so many months ago. But beneath the careful acknowledgement of complexity ran a thread of unwavering love, a commitment to discovering together who they had become and what they could build with the people they were now. William wrote about his dreams of their reunion, but also about his respect for the woman Kate had become in his absence, his admiration for her strength and independence and growth. Kate folded the letter carefully and placed it in the wooden box with all the others. 18 months of correspondence that documented not just their separation, but their evolution both as individuals and as a couple whose love had survived the ultimate test. Looking at the box sitting on their mantelpiece, filled with evidence of their endurance and devotion, Kate felt a deep sense of peace about whatever challenges reunion might bring. They had loved each other enough to survive 18 months apart. They had grown as individuals while maintaining their connection as a couple. They had proved that their love was strong enough to bridge any distance, flexible enough to accommodate any change, and deep enough to serve as the foundation for whatever future they chose to build together. The hardest part was almost over. All that remained was discovering what came next. May 15th dawned bright and clear, the kind of spring morning that felt like a promise of good things to come. Kate woke early in the cottage that had been her sanctuary for 18 months, surrounded by evidence of the life she had built in William's absence. The renovated bathroom gleamed with fresh tile and fixtures she had installed herself. The garden outside bloomed with vegetables and flowers she had planted and tended. The walls displayed photographs and artwork that reflected her evolved tastes and growing confidence. She moved through her morning routine with deliberate calm, knowing that this was the last time she would wake up alone in their bed, the last time she would have coffee by herself at their kitchen table, the last morning of the independence that had sustained and transformed her. There was sadness in these endings, even as they led to the beginning she had dreamed of for so long. Kate chose her outfit carefully, settling on a blue dress that William had never seen, one that she had bought for herself during the winter months when she was learning to appreciate her own judgment about what looked good and felt right. It was a small thing, but it felt symbolic somehow, a way of introducing him to the woman she had become while honoring the love that had remained constant throughout their separation. The drive to the airport took 40 minutes through countryside that was lush with spring growth. Kate had made this journey in reverse countless times in her imagination, picturing the route William would take from the plane to her arms. But the reality felt both more mundane and more momentous than her fantasies had suggested. Traffic moved at normal speeds. Other drivers went about their ordinary business, and the world continued its regular operations despite the fact that her life was about to be fundamentally changed. She arrived at the airport 2 hours early, unable to bear the thought of being late, even though she knew military flights often arrived behind schedule. The terminal was busy with the usual mix of business travelers, families on vacation, and other people whose lives intersected briefly in this space designed for transitions and reunions. Kate found a seat near the arrivals gate and settled in to wait, watching the electronic board that would announce William's flight. Time moved strangely during those 2 hours. Sometimes minutes felt like hours as Kate watched the clock and calculated how much longer she would have to wait. Other times, she would look up to find that 30 minutes had passed without her noticing, lost in memories or anxious speculation about how their reunion would unfold. She had imagined this moment so many times that the reality felt both inevitable and surreal. Other military families began gathering near the gate, and Kate recognized the particular mixture of excitement and nervousness that marked people who were about to be reunited with soldiers. Children fidgeted in their best clothes, wives checked their appearance in compact mirrors, and parents clutched signs with their sons' and daughters' names. Kate felt a kinship with these strangers who understood the weight of this kind of waiting. The flight was announced as on time, then delayed by 30 minutes, then back on schedule. Kate watched the board change and felt her emotions shift accordingly, riding waves of anticipation that left her feeling slightly dizzy and completely alert. She called her mother to pass the time, reporting on the flight status and receiving gentle reassurance about the normal nervousness that accompanies any major reunion. "You've both grown up during this time apart," her mother said gently. "That doesn't make your love any less real or important. It just means you'll have new things to discover about each other, new reasons to fall in love all over again." The wisdom in those words settled some of Kate's anxiety. She had been so focused on the ways they might have changed, the potential challenges of reunion, that she had lost sight of the possibilities. Perhaps their growth would make their relationship richer rather than more complicated. Perhaps the independence she had developed would make her a better partner rather than a more difficult one. At 2:15, 15 minutes ahead of the revised schedule, the arrivals board announced that the flight had landed. Kate felt her heart begin racing in a way that reminded her of their very first date. That mixture of excitement and terror that accompanies moments when everything important hangs in the balance. She joined the small crowd gathering near the gate, watching for the first passengers to emerge from the security checkpoint. Business travelers came first, moving efficiently with their carry-on luggage and focused expressions. Then, families with small children, vacation travelers comparing notes about their trips, and, finally, unmistakably, the first soldiers in uniform. Kate's breath caught in her throat as she scanned each face, looking for the one that had lived in her dreams and memories for 18 months. She saw him before he saw her, and the recognition hit her like a physical force. William looked older, more serious, his face leaner, and his posture straighter than when he had left. His hair was shorter than she remembered, and there were lines around his eyes that spoke of experiences she couldn't fully imagine. But his essential self was unchanged. The core of the man she had fallen in love with still evident in the way he moved, and the expression of careful hope on his face as he searched the crowd. Their eyes met across the busy terminal, and Kate felt time stop in the way it does during moments of profound significance. William's face transformed when he saw her, breaking into a smile that erased all the worry lines and made him look like the young man who had kissed her goodbye in their hallway so many months ago. But there was something new in his expression too, a depth and maturity that spoke of all he had experienced in her absence. Kate began moving toward him, her steps tentative at first, but gaining confidence as the distance between them closed. William dropped his duffel bag and opened his arms, and suddenly, she was running, all her carefully planned composure abandoned in the face of the overwhelming reality of his presence. When they collided in the middle of the terminal, Kate felt like she was coming home to herself in a way she hadn't experienced since the morning he left. William's arms around her were both familiar and strange, his body thinner than she remembered, but his embrace as warm and enveloping as it had always been. She could smell the military soap he had been using, different from the scent she remembered, but underneath it was the essential smell that was uniquely his. They held each other without speaking, both crying and laughing at the same time, overwhelmed by the simple miracle of being in the same physical space after so many months of separation. Kate felt all the careful independence she had cultivated dissolving into gratitude for the return of the person who made her feel most completely herself. "You look beautiful," William whispered into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "Different, but beautiful. Stronger." Kate pulled back enough to see his face, studying the changes that 18 months had written there. "You look tired," she said gently, reaching up to touch the new lines around his eyes. "But you're here. You're really here." They stood there in the middle of the airport, holding each other and drinking in the reality of reunion while travelers moved around them, and life continued its normal pace. For Kate, nothing existed beyond the circle of William's arms, and the sound of his breathing, and the impossible fact that the long wait was finally over. The drive home was filled with careful conversation, both of them aware that they were navigating new territory together. William asked about her work, her family, the cottage, and Kate found herself describing her life during his absence as if she was introducing him to a stranger. In some ways, she supposed she was. The woman sitting beside him in the car was not the same person who had watched him drive away 18 months ago. William shared stories from his deployment, carefully edited versions that gave her a sense of his experience without overwhelming her with details she wasn't ready to hear. He told her about the friends he had made, the work they had accomplished, the ways he had grown, and changed under pressure that tested every assumption he had ever held about himself and the world. As they turned into the driveway of their cottage, Kate felt a moment of panic. This space had been entirely hers for so long that she couldn't quite imagine sharing it again, even with the person for whom she had been preserving it. The garden was in full bloom. The house looked welcoming and well-maintained, but it reflected 18 months of her sole occupation and decision-making. William seemed to sense her nervousness as they sat in the car looking at their home. "It looks different," he said quietly. "Better. Like you've made it more beautiful while I was gone." Kate felt some of her tension ease. "I changed things," she admitted. "I painted rooms and moved furniture and planted the garden differently. I hope that's okay." William reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that was both familiar and strange after so many months of separation. "It's your home too," he said simply. "It should reflect you. I want to see what you've created here." They walked through the cottage together, Kate pointing out improvements and changes, William admiring her work and marveling at the skills she had developed in his absence. In the bathroom she had renovated, He ran his fingers over the tile work she had learned to do from internet tutorials and library books. In the bedroom, he noticed the soft blue walls that reminded her of his eyes. In the kitchen, he examined the new shelves she had built to display dishes they had received as gifts but never had space to use. "You've made it perfect," he said as they stood in the living room surrounded by evidence of Kate's industry and creativity. "It feels like home, but better. Like the home we always meant to have, but never quite managed to create together." They were both exhausted by the emotional intensity of reunion, and, as evening approached, they found themselves moving around each other carefully, like dancers learning a new routine. They cooked dinner together, relearning the rhythm of shared tasks, negotiating space in a kitchen that Kate had optimized for single use. They talked about safe subjects, mutual friends, family news, plans for the following day, while they adjusted to the strangeness of being together again. That night, lying in bed beside each other for the first time in 18 months, Kate felt overwhelmed by the complexity of her emotions. Relief and joy warred with anxiety and uncertainty. William's presence beside her felt both perfectly natural and completely foreign. She had spent so many nights imagining this moment, but the reality was more complicated than her fantasies had suggested. "Are you okay?" William asked softly, sensing her restlessness in the darkness. Kate considered the question seriously. Was she okay? She was happier than she had been in 18 months, but also more unsettled than she had expected. She felt like she was trying to fit back into a life that no longer quite matched the shape she had grown into during his absence. "I think so," she said honestly. "But I feel different, and I don't know if different is what you want or need or expected." William turned toward her in the bed, and even in the darkness, she could feel the weight of his attention. "Different how?" Kate struggled to articulate what she was feeling. "Stronger, I think. More independent. Less willing to disappear into us the way I used to. I love you just as much as I always have. But I love me more than I used to, and I don't know how those two things fit together." William was quiet for so long that Kate wondered if she had said something wrong, if honesty had been a mistake, when what they both needed was the comfort of familiar patterns and easy reunion. But when he finally spoke, his voice was warm with understanding and something that might have been relief. "I was afraid you'd want me to be the same person who left," he said quietly. "I was afraid that the changes in me would disappoint you or make you love me less. But if you've grown stronger, maybe you can love someone who's grown more complicated." They talked deep into the night, sharing not just the events of their separation, but the emotional journey they had each traveled alone. William spoke about the weight of command responsibility, about making decisions that affected other people's lives, about discovering reserves of courage and leadership he hadn't known he possessed. Kate described her professional growth, her increasing confidence in her own judgment, her discovery that she could be happy alone even while missing him desperately. As dawn approached, they began to understand that their reunion would not be a simple return to their previous life together, but rather the beginning of a new chapter written by two people who had been fundamentally changed by their experience of separation and survival. They would have to learn to love each other again, but they would do so with the wisdom gained from 18 months of proving that their love was strong enough to bridge any distance, flexible enough to accommodate any change. The morning sun streaming through their bedroom window found them still talking, still discovering each other, still working out the complex mathematics of love that has survived its greatest test. Outside, the apple tree that had been bare when William left was heavy with developing fruit that they would harvest together, a promise kept by both time and faith. Kate looked at William's face in the morning light, noting all the ways 18 months had changed him, while recognizing the unchanging essence that had sustained her love through their darkest months apart. He was different, and she was different, but they were different together, and that felt like the most hopeful thing in the world. Their goodbye without words had led them through a journey neither had expected or wanted, but it had brought them to a place where their love was deeper, their individual strength was greater, and their appreciation for each other was informed by the knowledge of what life felt like without the person who made them most completely themselves. The reunion was not an ending, but a beginning, not a return, but a transformation, not the recovery of what they had lost, but the discovery of what they had gained. In the cottage that bore the marks of both their shared past and Kate's solitary growth, surrounded by evidence of love that had survived distance and time and profound change, they began the work of building a life together that was richer and stronger for having been tested by separation and refined by the fire of individual growth. Their story of goodbye without words had become a story of reunion with deeper understanding, and the best chapters were still to come.